This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different cues.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Karina Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Joining us now in studio is Maine Republican gubernatorial candidate Ben Midgley. Ben, welcome back.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me again.
Good morning. I know you're very busy. I know you put a pile of miles on that vehicle you have. What are you hearing out there?
In general, from people, I would say frustration. Most folks are incredibly concerned about property taxes, what's happening to the business community, what's going on in the schools, the drug overdoses and drug deaths that are happening in the state. And that resonates with us. We lost our nephew to a drug overdose, like a lot of people in Maine. And just the lack of moral clarity is coming up more and more and more in the state. There's really no concern for taxpayers in the state anymore. There's not a lot of concern for what our kids are learning. All that gender ideology stuff keeps coming up. I mean, you got to stay away from little kids with that. When you're an adult, make your own decisions. But when you're a kid, that's between parents and the kids. Gosh, I could go on for hours. Cost of living, electricity, the health insurance crisis, child protective services, the welfare system. I mean, we can go on and on and on. And it is a little interesting that it's different in different parts of the state. I went to one meeting. I was actually in Belgrade, and the majority of their questions revolved around child protective services. And you can go other places in the state, and that might not even come up, or it's all about electricity and what have you. And there's still a lot of people on the Republican side, which surprised me, that don't understand what's really driving electricity costs. I was at the Sportsman Show in Augusta talking to a lot of different Republicans. They say, geez, I can't believe CMP keeps raising my electric bill. I'm like, it's not CMP. I'm not a huge CMP fan by any means, but they're not the ones driving up the electric bills. And then you have to go and explain the whole thing. And then you're thinking to myself, goodness, if we've got to go through this just to educate Republicans, there's a tremendous amount of work to get people to understand what's really driving up their costs. Because the Democrats keep saying it's natural gas and it's CMP, and it's neither of those things. And one other thing interesting that's coming up a lot, just came up last night too, is childcare. Childcare is a big problem for folks too. So we got some solutions for that. I think that could work well, but it almost runs the gamut. Now that's why I have this binder that's got 24 different tabs in it, because there's at least 24 issues. And that's the amount of tabs I could fit in a binder. They don't have anymore. But there's problems all around that have to be fixed.
Well, you certainly are organized. I think the last time you came in with us was back in September, if you can believe it. And boy, it's been a whirlwind since then. So what will be the first thing that you think you'll tackle if you do become governor?
You've got to get all your appointments in place. You got to do that right away. And obviously, we're talking to people now, but it's premature. You're just kind of getting an idea for the folks that you think would do a great job in different departments, because you've got to have the right people in the right places. That's part of being a CEO and an effective executive. You know, put people that are smarter than you in all the positions that they would excel at. And then you just work on keeping the team working at pace and together and towards unified goals. And that's really the job of the top executive, is to make sure everything works well together. But you got to have the smartest people in the smartest roles. You got to get the budget together very, very quickly. You've got 2 months to have that pulled together, and you've got to get tax cuts in place, and you got to redo your revenue forecast, which is a really interesting process if you really get into how the sausage is made behind the scenes. There's not really one specific department that the governor uses to get all the revenue forecasts in place. So you have to piece it together through a few different departments that provide that information. And then obviously you're going to factor in some economic growth to offset those tax cuts you're going to put in place. And you're going to have to look very closely at the spending we have, because a lot of spending needs to come in back to normal ranges, I'd say. And then the thing you have to be very careful of when you're going from business to the governor's office is there's a person on the other end of every dollar you take in government, and there's a person on the end of every dollar you spend in government. So you've got to really look carefully at what is the program exactly doing for people before you just go in and say, hey, that percentage is too high, let's just cut that. So you got to do a lot of work quickly in that respect. And I've got a bunch of executive orders that have to get put into place.
Oh, tell us about it.
Yeah, well, a number of things. And some things you can water down, and then other things you're going to have to get some legislative support on. But I do think if we win the governor's office, you're going to win the House. Obviously, you've got to end Maine sanctuary policies. You've got to get back to basics in education. And on the sanctuary policies, too, you can also pull back all the general assistance dollars. You can conditionalize that money or take that money back from Portland or Lewiston or Bangor if they're not doing the things you want them to do with that. And things have to happen differently in those cities. Fix Title IX situation in the state, get those boys out of girls sports, expedited permitting. We got a big issue with permitting in the state. So you can put expedited permitting in place for the DEP, Department of Transportation, allow outside consultant review so things can start to move a lot quicker. parental bill of rights, addressing illegal Chinese marijuana, statewide welfare program audit, governor's cost-cutting task force, and the Office of New Americans and the Office of Innovation, moratorium on no big contracts, government spending freeze, small business red tape review, child protective services overhaul, pictures on EBT cards. That's a good one. Bring that back. And then drug overdose and drug death reduction task force. I have pages and pages, so I won't bring you through all of them, but there's a lot of things you can do from an executive action standpoint that don't require a lot of legislative support. You can have your administrative agencies initiate changes. And then the issue is getting deep enough in the agencies, because you're going to have a lot of folks in there that have been held over from previous administrations that are going to try and wait you out or not really going to execute what you want to as fast as possible. So we've got a lot of thoughts on how we're going to move things along once we get in there.
So a few months ago, we had Mr. Woodcock on, the president and CEO of the state of Maine Chamber, and we're talking about that there's going to be zero job growth over the next 3 years. I'm concerned that we're having a tough time competing to get people in here. For one, the millionaires tax, and second, our education is at the bottom. And it's going to be tough to get innovators to come in here with a pile of cash to create jobs when we are going to tax them and not have the high education that they're looking for their kids. How would you overcome that?
We just did the debate recently that was driven by the Chamber of Commerce. He's talking about the job forecast through 2029, the Mills economic forecast is zero job growth forecasted through 2029. And you can't do that badly if you're trying to do that badly. It's unbelievable that you can have no growth for the next 3 years. So for me, it's a combination of lowering the cost of living and growing the economy at the same time. Because as you're trying to bring down costs for folks, that's for individuals. If you can create a bigger gap between the amount of money they make and the amount of money they spend, well, that's all just going to support themselves and their families. So you have to do that. And growing the economy is going to take a little bit, but you have to have a pro-growth business focus, which the state does not. Business are villains in our state, and you've got to turn that around. And investment in general goes where investment is welcome. And a lot of folks just won't look at Maine unless there's a real pending need that they have to be in this geographic territory, or they're just so embedded in the state that they can't pick up and move. A lot of businesses can't do that, as unhappy as they are with the business conditions. So one of the things I've been talking about all over the state, and I think I have been the only one up to this point, one other candidate just picked up on it, but the welfare system in the state is a huge problem. Economically for us, it's the largest expense in the state. The way the expenses work in the state, you've got about a $4.3 billion department in the Department of Health and Human Services. Then the Department of Education is about $4 billion. The next largest expense after that drops all the way down to $600 million. That's the University of Maine system. And the 10th largest expense is only $122 million. So you've got 80% of your budget in two departments in the state. So that's where all your money's going to come from if you're going to save money and get people lower taxes and such. So the welfare system, I've been on it. I'm also the only candidate who has actually been on food stamps. I've had nothing and then obviously gratefully been very successful. So I've seen all those stages in between and had to work myself out of that situation so I can empathize with folks in that situation and certainly have plans in place to help them get out of it. But the way our system works is we have what's called the cliff, where if you make too much money, you lose all of your benefits. So the Democrats specifically have set it up so it's very hard for people to get out of the system unless they have sort of an astronomical leap in earnings, which really doesn't happen if you're trying to climb the ladder and do a little bit better. But right now, folks can't take extra hours. They can't take promotions, increases in pay, and that's just completely detrimental. You can't have businesses working against the state. We've got roughly 400,000 people on these benefits. We only have 750,000 people paying taxes. So what's going to happen the way the state's doing it is if you don't get behind business, and I've got some specifics for you, then pretty soon you're going to have 700,000 taxpayers and 450,000 people on benefits. And then it keeps ratcheting around the other way because there's no other place you can go. And when you get on the system in Maine, you actually get a packet that shows up at your house that tells you all the other benefits that you qualify for. But Maine's starting to create this generational effect of just living off the state, and it just doesn't work that way. That's why every solution the Democrats have is take more taxes to build housing or take taxes to fix insurance. Every single one of them, all their plans are just take taxes to pay for things. So anyway, so you got to create that bridge for folks. So you're allowed to make more money. You need a federal waiver for this, and then you can slowly pay into the system as you make more money until you're off the system. And you set those parameters in place. And you're going to have some work requirements in place that are reasonable. And if someone's trying hard, but they can't get a job, because I'll tell you, I was just up in Washington County. There's some places, no matter how hard you're going to push someone to get a job, there's no job. So you've got to have proper reviews of that process. So if someone's actively trying to get employed, but they can't get employed, then you've got to extend things a little bit. And your job as governor is to get business in that area. So the other things you have to do in addition to that is you have to get rid of legislative and regulatory challenges that we have in the state. There's no predictability for businesses. They don't know if they make this big investment, what's going to happen next. So you've got to get that done. Electricity obviously has to be fixed. You have that company Lumbar Hardwoods. You guys remember that one? Went out of business. 74-year-old Maine business had to close because their public policy charge was going to go from $20,000 to $40,000. 22 people lost their jobs. Absolutely ridiculous. Housing and insurance. And we can talk in detail on those subjects. No problem. Permitting process, like we discussed, needs to be fixed. You got to cut personal corporate income taxes. You have to use incentives to bring businesses in. You've been following Gorham and the Amazon facility. You got people showing up to town meetings on that saying it's going to be a secret ICE facility and other things trying to stop that business from going in there. And they have a municipal fund that you can apply for that puts millions and millions of dollars into the community. New baseball fields, new sidewalks, new lighting, all sorts of things that go along with the jobs that they're going to bring in. And the more businesses you put in there, now you've got the industrial tax base going, which is going to help lower people's property taxes. And you still got people fighting that stuff on a local level, which is crazy to me. So you can't complain about property taxes and then stop businesses from coming into your community. I was up in Washington County just yesterday. They brought up 4 or 5 different large business entities that were trying to move in and the localities stopped it. So you've really got to get through to people to make sure they understand. By adding this, you're not going to hurt the environment or what have you. That's easy to work with. Maine's mostly environment. And what the offset is going to be for their cost of living. So all sorts of things you have to do from that standpoint. Got to reduce regulations. We got 135,925 regulations. That's a real number on businesses. It's crazy. You got silly things like conforming with federal rules on depreciation. We don't do it the same way in Maine that you do it federally, and it would be a lot better just to conform with that for business. FMLA, things like that, just a disaster for businesses. Every single business is just up in arms about this PFMLA program that they have and has to be changed. There should not be any mandate on that. Now, you can put some executive actions in there, and the way we support our heritage industries is terrible. I was just on lobster boats up in Winter Harbor. I spent a lot of time with the logging. We were just with the Robbins family the week before that happened. And again, our hearts just go out to them. They're such a wonderful family. It's such an incredible business. So hopefully they're all doing okay. I know they got a long road back, but a tremendous family. Spent a lot of time with other folks in the forestry space and then agriculture. Spent a tremendous amount of time up in the county. And we just do not support our heritage industries. It's just like we're trying to kneecap them. And if you don't support your own heritage industries, what are you doing? That's not Maine. That's not Maine values. So I guess in summary of that long, kind of explanation is there are so many things you can do to get business going in the state, not to mention just being a governor who is out selling the state day in and day out to get people to come into the state. And one of the questions in one of the debates was, well, how would you do that? I mean, honestly, you can't just sell it. And you're in the sales business too, right? Because when you sell in all the sizzle and there's nothing behind it, then you lose a lot of credibility. So you just got to establish trust with people. And they say, look, there's these challenges with Maine. This is going to cost us too much for electricity, or there's too many regulations. Well, you tell them, look, here's exactly what we're working on. And we are going to do our absolute best to make sure you are happy as a clam here in the state. And if there's challenges, you have a direct number to us. So when you're honest with people and you establish trust, then you can sell much better. And I think I can do that very effectively in terms of getting businesses in the state and getting more investment in the state and allowing businesses to expand, hire more, feel more comfortable doing business in the state, then everybody does better.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of businesses leaving Washington State and New York. I would hope we would be able to pick up on a few.
Well, they're doing the same thing that we're doing. Kathy Hochul is trying to drive out all the businesses before and all the folks that are making a lot of money. And then she's 3 years later begging them to come back. You've seen over in Seattle right now, 9.5% tax on anybody who makes over $1 million. I mean, you got to be kidding me. Starbucks is leaving Seattle. Every state that does that sooner or later figures out that they've made the wrong move. I was just hearing today, 10% of people in the country pay 76% of the taxes nationally. You keep making that pie smaller and smaller and smaller, all states are going to lose their taxes. It's the way it works.
Speaking of tax, let's talk about property tax. What's your position on that?
Property tax is a lot of things involved in that. We mentioned earlier, obviously, if you can just expand the industrial tax base, you can get businesses going, then that helps defer the tax base over businesses as well as homes. So that's very important. The more housing you open up, and we can talk in detail on housing, the more homes you allow to get into the ground, then that's going to add more property tax. Then municipalities can bring their mill rate down, which they should be managing anyways. I've seen a lot of municipalities, because this conversation is all over the state, who've done a very good job managing their mill rate. Others just haven't. And it's like they're almost ruthless in the amount of tax they want to go after for folks. First, you got to look at the revenue sharing plans, because the revenue sharing plans were designed originally to offset property taxes. That's the purpose of them. Now they've become line items in the budgets for towns. So the sales tax revenue share program that all communities get, it's 5%. That was designed to offset property taxes. And then this 55% revenue share on school funding was supposed to lower taxes. Words out of Mill's mouth, it's going to lower taxes by 15% for people. I haven't met one person who's had their property taxes lowered by 15%. They've all gone sky high. So you've got to put guardrails around those programs and then make them do what they're intended to. You have to enforce that if you're going to get this money, you are going to lower your taxes. That's the bottom line. I understand costs have gone up, but costs have not gone up that much. In a lot of cases right now, municipalities are assessing homes at 100% of sale value. The state minimum is 70%, and then the state tells the municipalities how much you're supposed to value your community at. So you can go in there and you can reduce that to 50%, 40%, 60%, whatever that right number forecasts out to be, and then change those regulations so then the municipalities can assess lower if they're not managing their mill rate properly, and that will create some relief for folks. And then you have to really push a strict budget focus for all communities on their tax reduction focus. Because you're having seniors that are being forced to take out reverse mortgages, seniors that are being told to sell their homes. You can't do that in Maine. You can, on the school side too, a lot of folks don't know about these things called regional education centers. So there's about 12 of them in the state. And what these do is, because we've got about 250 plus school districts, 150-ish that go K through 12, we've had a 6.6% reduction in the student base over the last 10 years. So you have many less students. So that's why you have some areas now that are starting to combine their school districts, Livermore and Jaded. And we have 11 different school districts right now that are looking at combining their school districts just because they don't have enough capacity for the schools. And property taxes are so high now. So we're at this point in the state where people are being forced to address this cost issue. So you can't have that many school districts with that much administrative overhead with less students. You can't do it. So these regional education centers are fantastic. You can coordinate purchasing, you can coordinate transportation, IT services, facilities, maintenance, food service, payroll, HR, all the things that you would normally concentrate on one G&A structure, you can do centrally for many school districts. So you can start to reduce expenses effectively there. And then you have voluntary consolidation for the school districts. That helps too. And you have to have a school budget review process. So a lot of folks don't know when the school districts send those budgets to the state for their reimbursement, this is a rubber stamp. Nobody's establishing norms of expense levels for each of the different types of positions and costs that you would have within a school system. So someone in the state should be reviewing to say, well, if you submitted your budget for the school district and you're 30% over the norm for this line item, why are you submitting it that high when you should be in this range? So at least a review process to make sure the expenses are in check, because a lot of times the folks that run the school boards, they have no business experience. They've never budgeted anything before. Maybe some have, but you're talking 30, 40, 50, 60, $100 million budgets. That's a complex thing to do right. So a lot of folks that in this day and age are mostly ideological about why they're on the school board don't have that expertise. So I see nothing wrong with having a review board in place to make sure that these budgets are being set properly.
Speaking of tax funding, what do you think about the municipality and the state government funding some of these nonprofits?
I don't like that at all. There's obviously some good nonprofits out there. Obviously, there's lots of them, but there's other ones that it's really more of a cyclical process, which is, I think, where you're potentially going, where the money goes out the door and it comes back in to support different candidates or different initiatives or different referendums, which kind of lends itself to a bigger problem in Maine, why we have all these sort of really driven liberal referendums that come into place is, and you all know this, Maine's an inexpensive state for these outside groups to come in and put some resources behind trying to get these crazy policies in place. And then we become sort of this testing ground on what you can get through and pull over on the people in Maine. It's on the cheap rather than doing it in New Jersey or Florida or Texas or Oregon even or California. It's so much less expensive. And sometimes these things get passed. So you've got to make sure you put a stop to that as best you can too.
Speaking of accountability, there doesn't seem to be anyone reviewing what's going on in DHHS. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. DHHS, like we mentioned earlier, is the largest budget item in the state. You're talking $4.3 to $4.5 billion in the budget. And then Department of Education is second behind that, about $4 billion. So I think it's pretty clear in the state. When you've run big businesses, your standard operating procedure is managing fraud, because working so hard to earn your money, you can't have money going out the back door. That's why you have regular audits and all those things, and you make sure your internal controls are adequate. You don't have any material deficiencies in controls. That's how an auditor would say it. Obviously, we've already failed the budgets at the state level, and they haven't really acknowledged it. They wouldn't let the Republicans even ask any questions. They wouldn't even let Matt Dunlett testify in terms of where the material weaknesses are when they got into committee on that or had a hearing on that. So culturally, you can tell there's no big concern about managing the money, and there's certainly no one wanting to come up and take accountability for the way taxpayers' dollars are being spent. So managing fraud in general is a very easy process. And I know for a fact that the state has the data to manage it properly. So One issue is, of course, licensing groups that are essentially fraudulent. They don't have the proper credentials. They don't have the right background. They're clearly not delivering the services they're supposed to deliver. Janet Mills, when the DOJ came down on her, did that video. Do you remember that video she did explaining how everyone's now licensed? They're under a higher level of scrutiny. That's the same thing they did with the Chinese marijuana grows. They just licensed them. No concern about the illegal activity or the dangers they pose to the public in the healthcare situations, whether services are being rendered or not, or no inspections in terms of looking at the quality of care that folks are getting or the facilities that they're in. But their solution is just license them. So that creates the talking point that there's a little more scrutiny for these groups. So you can clearly tighten that up. You can make all the waiver programs, autism or Section 20 or elderly and physical disabilities, you can make them all reapply. Obviously, you're going to have ones that are clearly legitimate. They've been in business for years. They have large physical facilities. They do everything proper. But then you're going to have these ones in the middle that are great. And you're going to have ones that are clearly not qualified to do what you do. So you obviously have those folks reapply because there's a lot of money going out the door on that. Then separately, the way you stop the money going out the door is you just create exception reports. So when you have a large AP department, accounts payable, you're going to make sure that any requests for payments follow the right criteria. Was this approved? And by the way, Maine changed the forms for different departments to sign off on expenses. There's no one who has to take full accountability for the expense anymore. Like I could show you that document. In any case, we have all the data that would say, well, this is outside the normal payment range for this service. These are the services that should have been rendered in that session. This is the documentation that's supposed to go along with that. And was the service even given or not? So you create these exception reports with each payment request from the vendor. And then if something is outside any of those norms that you reestablish, and we would reestablish all of them, then it doesn't get paid until it gets cleared. And then that exception report covers all the vendors. And you've got what? About 5,000 folks that have billed Maine Care over the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of vendors. So you take that exception report and you make sure it doesn't stop at department management. It goes right up to the commissioner of DAFs, the Department of Administrative and Financial Services, all the way to the governor's office. You can see what is your trend on exception reports. So if you start with thousands of exception reports, obviously the goal is to whittle that down to hundreds or dozens of exceptions that come through because now people are submitting it properly because they're not going to get paid. Once you have those exceptions, you make sure that nothing gets paid till they're cleared. And then you utilize your fraud department. We've got over 20 folks that we have out investigating these units, and they rarely ever prosecute. They only started withholding payments or filing charges against some of these agencies because the DOJ came in and Janet Mills was running for Senate, which she obviously isn't anymore. Of course, she's just waiting in the wings to come back after things get worse for Plattner. So you utilize them, you prosecute folks. You don't let them appeal it for 3 years. If you want to appeal it, you can appeal it from jail. Do it that way. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's also serious, right? You have to come down on these people hard so they understand don't do it again. You go back and you audit everything in the past that was made properly. You audit all future payments on a regular basis. And then, like at the national level, you can reward whistleblowers in the state. You know how many people in the state know what's going on, and you can allow them the opportunity to make money paid by fines from the providers, not from taxpayer money, when they turn in these things that are happening. You're going to have people turn in fraud all the time. They're going to be like, oh my God, I can make so much money doing this because there's so much fraud. And then you create a culture of accountability. And as governor, you get out and you explain to people what's going on, what we're finding in detail, what we're seeing, how much of their money we're capturing back and giving back to taxpayers. And then all of a sudden, your culture of fraud goes away. People's money is being managed effectively. And now it's a non-issue, like it's supposed to be.
So what's your stand on health insurance?
Health insurance has been made a mess because of the policies that the state's put in place. And again, like so many other issues, the biggest challenge right now we have for the health insurance plan is Maine Care, because there are far too many people on the Maine Care system. And that's 30% of our population in the state. 48%, by the way, of Washington County alone is on Maine Care. The challenge is you get these low reimbursement rates for the hospitals on Maine Care. They're getting 60 to 70 cents on the dollar. And they have then turned to the private market to make up all the difference. So if you remember, the Democrats had a bill in place to try to cap the amount that hospitals could charge for certain services to double the Maine Care reimbursement rate, and they lost it. We can't do that because we make all of our money on people in the private market. So every bit of money they lose from servicing a third of the state, they make up on the backs of people who shouldn't be paying those high premiums. That's the way the system works. So you've got to get these folks off of the system. And again, not by penalizing them. Like I was in Washington County. If you start taking people's health care away and they can't find a job, that's bad. You got families that depend on that and stuff. So you have to do this properly. And by the way, if you don't do this properly, you just go in and cut benefits and say, well, it's work this and work that, and you better do this or we're going to take your benefits away. You're never going to get elected again as a Republican. And we have some candidates right now, I'm not going to name names, that are just saying, look, it's about cutting. No, it's not just about cutting. It's about putting systems in place that allow everything to work better. And if you go in as a Republican and you get people back to work, you bring industry in, and you get costs down, then all of a sudden you've done this right. And guess what? You're elected again. And then you're elected for 12 years and 16 years. A lot of people don't know Vermont, as Democratic as it is, has a Republican governor for many years. And that guy's got to run every 2 years. Because to them, it is worth having someone who's sensible and balanced and thoughtful about their money in the state capital, even though the rest of the policies are off in outer space. But in any case, back to health insurance. So you've got to get that in place. And then you do that by removing the cliff. You need more competition in the state. There's only 6 insurers providing insurance in the state of Maine right now. We used to have over 30. Maine has the lowest car insurance rates in the country because there's so many car insurance providers providing insurance in the state of Maine. It's crazy. So you just need to have more insurance, but there's no reason for insurance companies to come back until you start to create more of a balance in the volume that they can service, right? Because they can't make enough money on the remaining balance that isn't on Maine Care. You need to adjust the reinsurance program. A lot of people don't know about this. So there's something called the Maine Guaranteed Access Reinsurance Association. But reinsurance in general means if you're an insurance provider and someone has a catastrophic injury, the insurer is only responsible to spend so much money before the reinsurance kicks in, which is a state program. We used to have a reinsurance level of $80,000. So for an insurance company, they know their max payout is $80,000. Maine moved that, the Democrats, to $135,000. So now you've added $55,000 per claim. Someone has a massive heart attack or a brain injury or something like that. That creates a different risk calculation for the rates they're going to charge to people in the state. And when you do that, rates jump up about 12 to 20%. So once we reverse that back, it's not a very expensive line item. You can drop rates up to 20% just with that. Then the state also, Janet Mills combined the small group and individual market. That's different than folks on a corporate plan. It's different than Maine Care. And that was against 2 actuarial studies that said if you combine those markets, it's going to make a much less attractive risk pool and rates are going to jump again. And they did it anyways because their push is to get more people onto state healthcare. They want universal healthcare, which would crush taxpayers in the state. So you've got to decouple those so they can have separately rated risk pools. You do have to take illegal migrants off the rolls. You just can't do that. We're one of only 7 states that has folks with illegal migration status on state benefits. So you can't do that. Hospitals do need to take a clearer position. The hospitals wanted the expansion. And I've been saying this a lot. So they've got to go on record. You can't have it both ways. You can't get everybody on Maine Care with the expansion, and then you can't get all the rates that you want. So if you want less people on Maine Care and you don't like those with the reimbursement rates, you have to go publicly and say that. Are they saying that right now? No. But they have to go out and do it. So they've made their own bed. Now they got to sleep in it. So they're going to have to come to the table. They're certainly going to come to the table under our administration. We're going to get that straightened out. You're going to get rid of fraud in the Maine Care system. Obviously, a lot of money there. When you have money going out the back door, you're charging people twice for it. And then obviously, Mills put in place that in addition to wasting our money on fraud, she put a clause in there that says basically taxpayers are going to be responsible if the Trump administration comes in and stops other people from causing fraud. Unbelievable. And then we're paying 3 to 5 times as much for things that we shouldn't be paying for. Like you look at just a number of the different services in the waiver programs, 3 to 5 times as much as other states pay for the same services. There's no regulation. There's no norm set for this. And a lot of times I think it's because of who's providing the services. They don't want to offend the Somali community or somebody else who's got something going on, so they don't regulate it. I don't care what community's causing the fraud. Doesn't matter to me at all. Fraud is fraud. Taxpayer money is taxpayer money. Maine's one of the highest tax states with the lowest average incomes. You can't do it. This money belongs in people's pockets. And you do need to pay the hospitals on time. Very important, because if you have lower reimbursement rates and lower cash flow, you can't keep your people staffed. You've got to get more doctors and more nurses back in the system. That's a whole separate conversation. That's another strategic approach. You should have a primary care requirement for folks that are on Maine Care because everybody just goes to the emergency rooms. That's all they do. But a lot of folks don't want to take those clients because of the low reimbursement rate. So you got some work to do there. But if you can stop folks from going to the emergency room for everything, then the folks that need the emergency services can get them. You can expand telehealth. And one thing I will certainly do, and I don't mind spending state money on this because you can build it effectively, is you need to put about 20 regional clinics all around District 2. You guys know, but a lot of people don't understand the difference between District 2 and District 1 until you get up there and you look at it. And they've lost so many healthcare services up there. It's just terrible. So you could put in smaller 3,000 to 5,000 regional clinics that are fully equipped very inexpensively, $3 to $4 million if you build them the way the private sector would build them. And then folks can go get the primary needs they need for themselves and their kids. And if something serious, then they can drive to a hospital, which in some cases is an hour and a half for some people out there. And you got to do it. And there's other things you can do. You can add telehealth. You can have a right to choose clause back in there like New Hampshire does, so folks can see their cost comparisons. And I could go on for a little bit longer, but some easy fixes.
But the doctors are not coming to this state.
For all the reasons we talked about, because it's hard to make money. The cost of living is very high. Housing is very high. So you have to have programs in place where you lock folks into staying, for example, at a hospital because you are going to work on a tuition reimbursement program. You have to look at your relocation expenses. There's all sorts of different things you can do to get folks to come in.
Because Karina lost her doctor and you found out about it on Facebook. Yeah, and there was no replacement for her doctor.
I've lost 4 primary care physicians.
Wow.
It's like, why bother? And then the other thing a lot of folks don't know about are these health co-ops. A lot of folks think they're just sort of for Christian groups or something else. But obviously, a lot of our trade associations do it. And Maine actually regulates who can and can't do it. You should just allow all these groups to pool together and get their own co-ops together. Because the broader you expand your risk pool, the lower your health insurance costs become. But these co-ops for individuals now, you can get a very inexpensive plan. You can cover yourself for $200 a month. It doesn't pay for your regular checkups and so on and so forth. But if you have anything that's serious, you have a $1,000 copay and you don't pay anything else and your copay doesn't renew. So for the big expenses, you can still get very inexpensive healthcare in the state. But a lot of folks try to sort of almost bury those services, and they shouldn't, because they're a good option for folks in the meantime as we get this insurance mess fixed. Throw it on the pile with everything else. But the thing about when you've managed a large organization, and you all know this, you run a big business, you can run at many initiatives at the same time. When you have those smart people in those roles, you just set up your strategic initiatives, and then you assign strategy, tactics, timing, make sure you have the right amount of resources on there, and then you just manage all those initiatives going forward, and you'd be amazed how fast things get in the right direction.
Obviously, because of our aging group in the state of Maine, there's more people going to the hospital rather than having younger people who are cheaper to insure.
Yeah, but you look at New Hampshire. Maine's average age is only 2 years higher than New Hampshire. 2 years is not a massive gap when you talk about health risk conditions or things like that. It's just managed better in another state. And the thing that concerns me the most about a lot of what's going on now is 2 things. One, people blame all these challenges on being Maine. We're in the northern part of the country, so that's why we have these problems. People don't want to come here, or this exception or that exception. And then also, I get very concerned that people are starting to think of what's happening over the last 7 years now as normal. It's not normal. It's not normal to pay this much taxes. It's not normal to have this many drug deaths. It's not normal for our kids to be learning the things that they're learning. It's not normal for housing to cost this much, or for Mainers to have the highest electricity bill in the country. And you can go down the list. It's not normal to have 30% of your population on welfare support. And right now, I think a lot of people are just upset, and they don't understand, and they're frustrated. And that means they don't go out and they don't vote and they don't do the things that they want to do because they're kind of feeling a little hopeless. And it's not hopeless. You can turn this around. There's no question in my mind that you can fix this. And you just got to get somebody out there who helps people believe it, shows them some wins, and then all of a sudden things start turning around.
So before we let you go, people are voting now. June 9th is coming up pretty quickly. Why should voters be voting for you?
A lot of reasons. First, I grew up here. My wife grew up here. She's from Lyman. So many people have met Sonia. And by the way, I just want to thank everybody for how incredibly loving and warm and supportive they've been on Sonia in this whole process. It's fantastic, and she loves it. Our kids grew up here. They all went to school, the same high school I did. One's still in school, so we're very familiar with everything going on in the schools. But in any case, Maine built my character, built my wife's character, built our kids' character, and I understand the difference of what it was when we were kids to where it is now. And it's not where it's supposed to be. And it's not normal, like we talked about earlier. And then secondarily, like I said, I've been on unemployment. I've been on food stamps. I never graduated college. Gratefully, I became very successful. And I think that gives me a different angle and view on things in the state than other people have, because I've been through that experience and I know how to get people off of that. And I know how to get people into a better situation. I've been doing it my whole life. So I think that's very important, because you can go in with a sharp, shrewd business mind, and sometimes you don't think about the human aspect of it. And you can do both things right. You can take care of people and you can manage things financially effectively without compromise. And I believe that wholeheartedly. Okay, so that being said, something I've said before on the trail is 50% of winning is showing up. So the most important thing is that we get out there, we get the people that we know to vote, we get them to get the people they know to vote, because we lost, for example, the House last year by 60 total votes for the whole state. Some races were lost by 6 votes, 12 votes, 15 votes. So a few more people voting could have made a huge difference. So I think there's really good energy right there. And then 50% of winning, the other 50% is the right candidate. And I've run billion-dollar companies. I built a billion-dollar company from scratch, created 15,000 jobs nationwide, and that's an experience very few people are ever going to get. So from the executive standpoint, that gives me all the experience I need to run the government very fluently and effectively, and I don't think anyone else there has that same background. As well, the team I have around me, in my opinion, has the most political depth of anyone's team. Certainly at the moment, they are experts in state government, and that's what you need around you. So you add those two things together, that is a very good combination, and it's very formidable for the Democrats. And you add to that having the right temperament and the right focus, I think is incredibly important, because right now we are outnumbered as Republicans by 40,000 registered Democrats in the state. Mathematically, you cannot win, even if all the Republicans turned out. You can't do it. And the Democrats are going to turn out hard. So you have to get the unenrolled or the independent voters to vote for a Republican. It's the only way to do it. And you've got to get the disenfranchised Democrats. There's a lot. Plenty of people have been flipping over to come on side and vote for me. I can't give you an exact number, but it happens quite often that we get those messages because they're paying the bills too. Their businesses are getting hurt too. So I can't tell people who to vote for, but I think people have to make a very critical decision, which is who is the most effective candidate to get into the general and get those folks to come over to our side. I don't think you're going to do it being a very aggressive or upset Republican. I don't think you're going to do it by just pointing the finger at the Democrats. I think you have to get up there and explain to people, this is what has happened. This is the reality behind it, and this is how we can fix it. And then they keep their ears open. If you go out there too much on the other side, they close their ears. They don't want to hear it anymore. You've got a fractured country. You got a fractured state right now with everything going on. There's too much vitriol. There's too much anger and frustration. A lot of people turn it off. So you need to give them something that they have not seen on the Republican side before. And I think that's what we offer. And we feel strongly that we're the best team to bring a win home for folks in November. And I'm very confident that we can.
Maine Republican gubernatorial candidate Ben Midgley, thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure.
Again for having me.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. The most important voices aren't always the loudest ones. They're the voices of everyday people, raising families, running businesses, serving their towns. That's who we want to hear from. Share your ideas with us online, and let's make sure those voices are never left out. Find us on Facebook or on X or at qpointpodcast.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.